Tintern Abbey is called a magnificent creation of William Wordsworth, and many critics have compared this poem with Milton's Paradise Lost regarding diction, regarding use of language. Milton's Paradise Lost is an epic, and the language of this epic is called the true gem of English language. And Tintern Abbey is undoubtedly a masterpiece of William Wordsworth. If you think of its subject matter, its diction, Wordsworth's use of language, and his way of throwing the language in this text is undoubtedly exceptional. And Wordsworth could not produce a poem like Tintern Abbey during the rest of his poetic career. And it is said that Wordsworth, after 1805, could not produce a poem like Tintern Abbey during the rest of his poetic career. So why? Actually, we do not know any certain reason. It is mostly because of most probably because of his involvement in politics, and most probably because of his involvement in other sort of writings. Wordsworth could not sustain his poetic faculty that he exhibited in his poems like Prelude or Tintern Abbey or Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. So anyway, now come to the subject matter of Tintern Abbey. What is the subject matter of this poem? This poem is about Wordsworth's visit to Tintern Abbey. Abbey, you find this building in the picture. This is a picture of an abbey. Abbey means monastery. Abbey means monastery, and the monks usually exercise their religious rituals or activities in an abbey. So Wordsworth went to Tintern on his way to Bristol, and there he found an abbey. The landscape there fascinated him, and it is said that while he was in Tintern, he started writing the poem Tintern Abbey, and while he was in Bristol, he finished composing the poem. So just think of the magnificent creativity of William Wordsworth. So in a very brief period, he composed this poem. Now, this poem is structurally divided into three sections. The first section, from line number 1 to 22, description of nature. Wordsworth has described nature very minutely. And his description of nature is so lifelike, so practical, that we, the readers, feel that we are there. While we recite Wordsworth's description of nature, we feel that we are there. It is because of Wordsworth's exceptional quality or exceptional dexterity of producing word picture or imagery, that is images. So the pictorial quality of his poems, not only of this particular poem, but of many of his poems. In Lucy poems, you will find the exemplification of hypnotizing images or imageries. Okay, so Wordsworth has very minutely described nature in the first section, that is from line number 1 to 22. And from line number 23 to 13, you will find Wordsworth's development of nature. Wordsworth has said that at the very inception, that is while he was a young man, while he was a man of 23, that is in 1793, he made his first visit to Tintern. in 1793. And at that time, he was a young man of 23. And at that time, nature appealed to his senses only. That is, his love for nature, his attachment with nature was sensual or sensuous. But after 5 years, in 1798, while he was a man of 28, that is, he was a mature man, he found that nature was not a vacuum. Nature was not a book with blank pages. He found that nature was a book with pages full of information, full of knowledge, full of philosophy. So nature was to him at that time a source of healing power, a source of soothing effect. Nature was then to me became an abode of the spirit of eternity. Nature was to him at that time was a resort of humanity. So during his second visit, he was a philosophic observer of nature. And that very philosophic attitude towards nature is incorporated in the middle section of Tintinabee. His pantheism is also there. And in the last section, you will find Wordsworth's tribute to Dorothy Wordsworth. Dorothy was with him. Now I like to recite the first few lines of this poem. Okay. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of long winters, 5 long winters. And again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs. With a soft inland murmur, once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. So the affinity of nature with the sky is very minutely and subtly depicted here in these lines. And just think of the tranquility, just think of the solitude or seclusion of nature. It seems the seclusion of nature is alive. Wordsworth is communicating with the silence, with the tranquility of nature. This happens only when the poet's mind and nature come together. When the marriage between a poet's mind and the nature's essence is possible, this kind of situation may happen. So Wordsworth communicates with the tranquility of nature. Why and how? How is it possible for him? It's possible because Wordsworth can bring about a marriage between his mind and the essence of nature. So the essentialist portrayal of nature in Wordsworth's poetry is undoubtedly distinctive. This very distinctive essentialist portrayal of nature has made Wordsworth a poet of nature. Okay, I also see the nature. I visit nature, but I cannot communicate with nature. I cannot talk to nature. I cannot borrow the language of nature. But Wordsworth can do it. For that reason, we call him a poet of nature, a worshipper of nature. Okay. In the middle part of this poem, we will find the development of thought towards nature. And for example, I have quoted here a few lines from the poem, from the middle portion of this poem. These beauteous forms of nature, that is different aspects of nature, different pictures, landscapes of nature. through a long absence have not been to me, as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. But oft in lonely rooms and with the din of towns and cities I have owed to them. In hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart with tranquil restoration. So not only nature, but also the recollections of nature, the reminiscences of nature can work as a perennial source of healing effect to the poet. So just think of the communication, just think of the intimacy between the poet and nature. This is possible because Wordsworth has spiritualized nature. Wordsworth has not intellectualized nature. We, the intellectuals, intellectualize nature. For that reason, we cannot embrace the spirit of nature. But Wordsworth could spiritualize nature. He could touch the spirit of nature with his own spirit. So there was a kind of compromise between his spirit and the nature spirit. And for that reason, not only the physical aspects of nature, but also the recollections that he collects in his memory during his visit can serve as a perennial source of, eternal source of, permanent or perpetual source of pleasure, soothing effect or healing effect to the poet. Okay. Actually, this happens, or Wordsworth can read nature in this way, in his maturity, not in his childhood or in his youth. And in this middle section, Wordsworth finds that nature is an abode of an eternal spirit. And we call, or we can term this kind of feeling as pantheism. Pan means many. So pantheism means, theism means belief, belief in many eternal spirits or gods. Wordsworth finds that God is everywhere. In the tree, there is God. In the river, there is the spirit of God. In the sky, there is the spirit of God. Or in the plants, in the bushes, there is the spirit of God. So this omnipresent nature, this omnipresent nature of God, and this kind of belief is known as pantheism. Okay. So now I am reciting a few lines from this poem that reflect Wordsworth's pantheism or pantheistic belief. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts. A sense sublime of something far more deeply interferes, whose dwelling is the light of the setting suns, and the round ocean and the living air, and the blue sky and the mind of man. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thoughts, and rolls through all things. So a motion, a spirit rolls through all aspects of nature. For that reason, even the meanest flower that you find in intimations of immortality, even the meanest flower can make the poet thoughtful. Why? Because that very flower is insignificant. It is not. It is not valueless, or it is not insignificant. It is magnificent to him because it contains the spirit of God. Okay. So Wordsworth surrenders his self to the self of nature, and he declares himself to be a worshipper of nature. And nature is to him the guard, guide, and guardian. Nature is to him a great teacher. So Wordsworth has said, therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from the green height, of all the mighty world, of eye and ear, but what they have created. So now here we find that Wordsworth has developed a kind of affinity with nature. And for that reason, it's possible for him to call nature his guard, guide, and guardian. Okay, so nature is also the nurse. As a nurse nurses a child and helps the child grow into a boy. Similarly, nature provides Wordsworth with ideas, with new thoughts. And if you read a poem by William Wordsworth, I just like to refer to a poem that you have not read most probably because it is not included in your curriculum. Matthew, a very famous poem by Wordsworth. In that very poem, you will find that a cruel man, Matthew, is beating his horse mercilessly in a moonlit night. So the horse received some wounds because of intense beating. And suddenly, a drop of blood from the wounds of the horse fell on a stone. And Matthew suddenly looked at that very drop of blood. And immediately there was a dramatic change in his mind. The blood was red, and he thought that the same blood was flowing through his own veins. And immediately he could feel the pain of the horse. So he stopped beating the horse, and since then he was transformed into a good man. So in this way, Wordsworth says that nature is our teacher. Nature can bring about positive changes in our mind. Okay. So nature is man's absolute friend. Now here you again see the picture of a bee, and in the last section of Tintin Abbey, Wordsworth has paid glowing tribute to Dorothy Wordsworth, who was with him during his second visit to Tintin. And at the same time, he declares himself to be an absolute worshipper of nature. Nature is our absolute friend. You may have very good friends, but his behavior or his attitude towards you may be artificial. It may be saturated with his selfishness or narrowness. But nature is always a man's friend. So this is the specialty of Wordsworth's attitude towards nature. Just think that Wordsworth always finds goodness in nature. Wordsworth is blind to the negative aspects of nature. Nature has got red tooth and claws that we find in Thomas Hardy of Victorian literature, of Victorian age. But we do not find nature with its cruelty in William Wordsworth. And many critics say that this is a limitation of Wordsworth's attitude towards nature. Wordsworth never finds anything negative in nature. I just like to recite a few lines from the last section of Tintin Abbey. Oh, yet a little while, may I behold in thee what I was once. So Wordsworth looks at the eyes of Dorothy Wordsworth, his sister, and he narrates his reaction. My dear, dear sister, and this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. So if you love nature, in return, you will get love from nature. But Wordsworth does not tell us about the binary opposition. If you hate nature, what will you receive? Suppose today the ecologists find that nature is behaving cruelly. Suppose the cyclones are frequent now. Global warming is challenging our existence on this planet, and it is apprehended by the climatologists that within 50 years, many regions of the world will go underwater because of the rise of sea level, because of the rise of temperature of the world or global warming. Okay, suppose Maldives or Venice city of Italy will go underwater, and southern parts of our country will go underwater. So nature is starting taking revenge upon us. Why? Because we are also showing cruelty to nature. We are cutting down trees. We are cutting down the hills. We are destroying forests or forest land. We are killing many animals unnecessarily. For that reason, nature is now taking revenge upon us. Okay, so Wordsworth very peculiarly did not focus on this binary opposition of nature. He only says nature never did betray the heart that loved her. Now, if you do not love nature, then what will happen? Wordsworth does not say. And many critics say that this is the limitation of Wordsworth's attitude towards nature. And if you write an answer to the question, discuss Wordsworth as a poet of nature, I think you have to mention this limitation and explain elaborately. And I think this interpretation, eco-critical interpretation, is very relevant to your answer. Okay. So here Wordsworth brings about a contrast between human beings and nature, and he comes to the conclusion that nature is man's absolute friend. And for that reason, he declares himself to be a worshipper of nature. Wordsworth here says, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, now catch from the wild eyes this glimpse of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in the service, rather say with warmer love, oh, with far deeper zeal of holier love. So Wordsworth says that in future, he may not be with his sister, Dorothy Wordsworth, but if Dorothy recollects the memories, then she will receive healing effect or soothing effect. And thus, Wordsworth means to say that nature, not only nature, but also the recollections of nature can serve an endless source of soothing effect or healing effect. Okay. So now, dear students, I am towards the end of my lecture. On the screen, you find some broad questions. Here, critically appreciate Tintin, that is critical appreciation. You have to critically appreciate Tintin. You must focus on the thematic aspects and technical aspects of this poem. And last of all, in conclusion, you have to comment on this poem very relevantly and convincingly. You must not make any sweeping judgment. The judgment that you will offer must be based on your profound observation and sufficient interpretations and explanations. Discuss Wordsworth's development of thought about nature. I think you have got some ideas about this particular aspect from my discussion. Then the last question, discuss Wordsworth as a poet of nature. I think all these aspects have been sufficiently discussed today. So this is all about today's lecture on Tintin Abbey. And now I like to hear from you. Please